Okay, right now what we're going to do is we're going to give you some of our general tips and tricks that we've learned in the last 10 years of doing air excavation with supersonic air tools. ANSI Z133 doesn't have very much literature on safety procedures involving air tools, and so first and foremost we're going to worry about personal protective equipment, which is PPE. We found that in varying scenarios we have two different size guns, so depending on what you're doing, that really comes down to safety of the operator, the technique you use, and personal preference of the operator depending on the season. First thing we're going to talk about is personal protective equipment. It's very important and fundamental to every job we do here at the Fifth Element Protocol. That usually involves proper footwear, which is a high top boot, and also gloves and face and eye protection. Now at that point, you really have to tell yourself, okay, to make the operator comfortable, do you have to wear a coverall suit? Do you need double eye protection, which includes glasses and a clear shield, which we'll demonstrate for you, but also whether you're using the big gun or the small gun. Now we affectionately refer to them as the small gun and the big gun because we have two distinct purposes. The small gun is used for smaller planted trees, 3 inches in diameter or less. We've made sure that we know what trees we're going to be approaching on a property, so that way we know whether we need the small gun, 185, which is commonly offered in most of your arboricultural supply companies, and the larger model, which is a 375. One of the major advantages that we have here at the Fifth Element Protocol is we have the choice of choosing between the small gun, 185, and the large gun, 375. Now there's a huge difference in the amount of air that comes out of the nozzle, but we have to remember that each gun has an individual job. At this point, we have to tell you that we use the small gun for trees less than 3 inches in diameter. The large gun is specifically for larger trees with an increased diameter of over 6 inches. Now, that becomes important when you have 6 to 8 inches of compacted soil to get through, or you have a smaller tree with a limited amount of critical root zone. First thing we want to tell you about is the small gun. Now we affectionately refer to it as the little gun because we have two different sizes. They have two completely distinct jobs. First thing you have to realize is that the dispersal pattern for a small gun is much, much less than a larger gun, as you would probably figure. But that also means that your operator has personal preference as to how much or how extensive their array of personal protective equipment is. A lot of times you'll see us feature our operators where they don't feel the need to wear a full coverall suit, which means, of course, that it's probably hot outside when you're doing excavations at above 90 degrees. It's very uncomfortable, and so some of our operators don't feel the need to wear the suit, but that also means that they're going to get very, very dirty. You're going to ruin socks, you're going to ruin all of your clothing, and it's going to be very messy. And so you have to take that into consideration, what the personal preference of the operator and what season of the year it is. Also, you have to take into account that when you're using the smaller gun, 185 model, that your dispersal is going to be much less, therefore it's going to require more passes with the smaller gun. Our 185 is specifically designed for doing trees less than 3 inches in diameter. That's very important when you have to consider what you are close to, which means, are you next to a deck? Do you have competing plants and bushes that you should not interfere with? That also means that your cleanup is going to be much, much easier, considering your dispersal pattern is significantly decreased when you have a decreased amount of air volume. That also means that your safety considerations, which means how close you are to your hose, your fellow operators, and your person, is very important. I just like my fellow operators, love using the larger model of the supersonic air tool. It's so much faster and so much more efficient, especially considering that the majority of our critical root zones that we deal with have excess compaction. At that point, we say, okay, during the consultation process, you know whether you're going to use the small gun or the big gun. My guys love using the big gun because it's much faster and much more efficient. You can excavate such an excessive amount of soil that your dispersal pattern is absolutely essential to the consultation. Now, when you consider your cleanup, how extensive your excavation is, and how long it's going to take, that is the major deciding factor in whether to choose the small gun or the large gun. When operating the large gun, 375 CFMs, that's a very, very large amount of air and a very quick excavation. That also means that you have some safety requirements that have to be observed. Number one, you cannot blast yourself in the feet. That's very important considering the excess amount of air that's coming out of the nozzle. Number two, that also means that you almost are required to wear a full body protective suit, full face clear shield, and secondary eye protection. We also have a full face respirator as well as a secondary dust mask that you can wear. At that point, you have to ask your operators, how hot is it? How comfortable are you wearing a full complement of personal protective equipment? And how dirty are you willing to be by the end of the day? When operating large gun for extended periods of time, you have to keep in mind that you are going to generate an excessive amount of heat. The operator's hands are going to get hot. Wearing a full complement of personal protective equipment is going to make your operator sweat. And you have to remember that there are state regulations that require you to give your operators extended breaks. Now, during the summertime, that's very important because you have heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and personal operator preference. During the summertime, if your operator chooses to wear a full complement of personal protective equipment, you are required to give them breaks at every interval necessary to keep them from exhibiting symptoms of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. That also means that their mental prowess and their mental capability will be decreased when they experience symptoms of fatigue. That means that you, as the owner / operator, must watch your people closely. We like to have a third man on the field operations crew for several different reasons. The first reason is to keep your operator out of trouble. The second reason is that he is able to manage the constantly changing scenarios that you're going to experience from minute to minute in every single critical root zone you visit. First and foremost is safety. You want to keep your operator safe. You want to make sure that he is being watched by a spotter and that he's not operating on his own. Second is that the swingman or the gopher has to manage the entire site, both operator and passersby, or anybody who might want to come and watch what you're doing from a minute-to-minute basis. We operate with our family. We are a family-owned and operated business, and so we have several factors that mitigate how operations are conducted. The main operator of the big gun is my brother. And a lot of times we let his preference rule the entire scenario as long as it does not conflict with safety regulations. If he's operating safe and conducting himself in the most efficient way possible, we let his personal preference rule the scenario. If there's anything in conflict with that, I, as the swingman, or whoever might be working with us, will let him know at any time when he is getting into trouble. We do not want our operators doing anything alone by themselves without any supervision. We do not want our operator to take unnecessary risks or put himself or anyone's personal property in jeopardy. That is the main reason why we require a spotter/swingman to be observant of all safety regulations as well as personal property and managing the constantly changing environment which we are working in. Finally, one of the last reasons that we consider when we're doing a team-oriented root collar excavation is the fact that we don't want to overexpose or excessively expose any roots, root collar, or critical root zone. One of the major reasons is that our customers oftentimes do not want us to proceed through all the tree preservation actions. Many times they will hold us up short because of budgetary concerns, time restrictions, or other personal preferences. At that point, we have to make sure that we don't overexpose, over-excavate, or put the tree in any further risk than it already is. One of the main benefits that you're going to get from buying our program and watching this DVD is that you want your guys to get together and participate in a discussion of what is really involved in a tree preservation job. There's a lot of different actions and several different line items that you're going to be performing. And so it's a good idea to get your guys together to discuss, participate in an active discussion and a demonstration, which is practice, before you get on the job. One of the main benefits that you're going to get from doing this when you're not on site is your level of expectation and performance is so much higher when there's money on the line. You have to be sure that all of your guys are conversant, that they know how to talk to each other, how to give hand signals, and practice that before you get on the job, because you don't want to get into a situation where somebody doesn't know what to do. That's when you invite hazards, and that's when you run into problems.
And so our operator now next needs to get into his personal protective gear, which consists of several pieces, and you'll see him put that on right now. Your standard protective oversuit, and many of the demonstrations and operators that we've seen don't use this, and we don't understand why, because if you work an air tool to any extent, you're going to start sweating. And once you start sweating and you atomize this dust, which you're about to see, then you'll end up in wearing that dust out of here in a very thick layer that sticks to the perspiration on your skin. And we would rather have the operator clean enough to where his working partners would let him back in the truck to ride home with them, rather than having him covered with dirt. We now have the hard hat. It's a ratcheting 6-point support within the shell. There's ear protection, there's clear shield face protection, he's got additional eye protection, and if it gets real dusty, he can put on the dust mask, which would help filter that dirt and keep it out of his mouth. A little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer, especially if the environment is contaminated with previous applications of herbicides or weed killers or anything like that where there's a toxic pesticide substance. Put on the gloves. All of the openings of the suit are elastically closed, and puts it around the bottom of the high top boots, and he is now ready to go. There is the heavy duty air tool, which is going to be attached to the compressor, and what I'm going to do is show you the compressor and give you some statistics on it. This is an Ingersoll Rand 375 WCU air compressor. It consists of a 6BT1 or 4BT1, excuse me, 4-cylinder diesel engine. It's a real hoss. It's exceedingly complicated device, but what we've learned is that if we do our service and routine procedures on time and keep it in shape, that we let the factory guys take care of all of the other technical aspects of it. There's a startup protocol. There is a cool down, because this has a turbocharger on it, and you have to cool down the turbocharger. And as I said, this is a 375 CFM. It's important you understand that these air compressors don't move this dirt in the critical root zone with air pressure. They move it with air volume that enters into the pore spaces of the soil and lifts, pulverizes, and places it in an area close around where we're going. And so you can use the smaller compressor, but you'll be underpowered in the very tightly compacted clay environments where there is very little air spaces. So now we're going to get going. We're going to put the hood up. We're going to attach the air tool. And we've got a special 4-point connection here. There we go. Locks it into place. And there's a little safety pin that we can put in there as well. And while he's making his final adjustments, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right over here to the air compressor, and I'm going to start it up, and we'll get ready to go. All right, we're fixing to do some root collars, and the reason we're here in this particular spot is this red oak tree and the one next to it is right along the edges of a new construction site where a workshop is to be placed. And the owner has asked us to evaluate these trees to, number one, make sure that they're going to survive and thrive, and number two, to make sure that once he places the workshop where he has designated and it's been approved by county permit, that this tree will not fail, or by virtue of the construction preparations they've made on this site, will not cause it to fall on him and create a hazard.